LDComics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeten as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of published graphic novelists: Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates and Nicola Streeten. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
Thanks for the introduction, Nicola. I'm a cartoonist, these days known as a graphic novelist. My wife Angela. Just to give you a very brief bit of background, we moved here to New York City. We're now resident in New Jersey, across from Manhattan. We've been here for nearly 14 years now, haven't we?
Yeah.
But we'll get to all that. This, I guess, is what I'm known for. Hugo Tape, which featured in the music and comics magazine in the late 80s and early 90s, Deadline. This is my big hit, as mentioned, Laika. 15 foreign editions, including Russian this year in April. I've also written lots of Doctor Who graphic novels. I have done loads and loads of children's books, graphic novels, that kind of thing in my time. Lots of things for literacy schemes, YA. I've worked for the big two. In fact, I started my career working for Marvel UK back when Marvel had a UK office, and I was, I think, the youngest editor at that time that they'd ever had. All of this is to say, really, it's all comics. It's my career, which spans over 30 years now, which is terrifying. Spans kind of 30 years, and we came to this country to basically try and take advantage of some opportunity that we thought was coming our way with Laika. And at that time, I put out an idea to First Second, who published Laika, for a book called Skin Trouble, which was supposed to be an anecdotal book about what it's like to be in a mixed race relationship. It was supposed to be fairly light-hearted, funny. And I had an idea for another book, which was about my dad's life and Angie's dad's life. And so this was a bit of artwork that spoke to that. It was sort of an introduction, a bit of a promo piece. And I worked on this version of the book for many years, and I could never get it to work. It was too complex. And part of the reason for that was because I'd signed a contract that was basically both this version of the book, the kind of bio of our fathers, and the anecdotal book smushed together. And it was too complicated, and there were always two separate stories, and it wouldn't work. So about 3 years ago, I went back to Mark Siegel at First Second and said, look, I can't make that version of the book work. Can we try another approach? And he agreed. And so that's the version of the book that I'm working on now. So this is much more of that anecdotal book that I mentioned. And it starts in 1989 on mine and Angie's first date.
Yeah.
And these are just a couple of early sort of model shots from, we don't look like that anymore. In fact, we never did. But they're sort of basically the character pegs upon which to hang this particular narrative. And this was our first date. This was a anti-Salman Rushdie march in May 1989. And I was on the Big Ben side of Westminster Bridge, and Ange,
I used to live in Peckham, so I was on the other side coming in by bus. The number 12, by the way.
We'd arranged to meet on the South Bank, hadn't we?
Yeah.
So when I got out of the tube, because I lived in Putney at the time, so I got out of Westminster Tube, I had to navigate this, and as I crossed, it turned into a full-scale riot. So the kind of purpose of showing you this is to sort of give you an idea of, I mean, the tone of the book, one of the themes of the book is tolerance and intolerance. So the book starts this way. These are just some thumbnails, which are done part digitally, part traditionally. I sort of print stuff out and then redraw over it, which I'll show you in a minute. And this is me just basically trying to get across the bridge. And there was a lot of different stuff going on and a lot of different points of view. And it was all, you know, the metaphor of actually crossing a bridge to kind of get somewhere. And this is what I was confronted by as I got halfway across. Everything went very, very quiet, like the lull before a storm. And I just saw this line of very, very angry looking police officers. As luck would have it, there was also a little traffic island in the middle of Westminster Bridge at that time. It's no longer there. And a journalist beckoned me over. So I ran over and he said, "Here you go, mate. I don't know what you're trying to do, but you're obviously trying to get across." And he gave me a press pass. And he said, "Just wave that at the coppers and they'll let you through." And I ran towards the coppers waving this press pass. And they did indeed let me through. And we got to the other side and I met Ange and we were quite traumatized by the event, weren't we?
Yeah.
So, and I could just remember somebody saying to you, "Excuse me, what do you think about blasphemy?" And
I was just not having it that day.
She grabbed me and pulled me away. And that's just sets up the kind of theme of the book, but then we get back to that as well at various points. This is me just this is just to sort of show you how I work sometimes. That's done, they're digital pencils, and then I've kind of done actual physical pencils over the top. There's some more model sheets. I get all this stuff ready and prepared. But that's not really, this is a unique collaboration because we've never done this before, have we?
No,
we've never done it.
No, I've never laid myself bare like this. I'm kind of usually save stories about race to close friends, really. I've never done this kind of thing before. So it's quite kind of unique, but I am quite enjoying it. So yeah, you know. So even if you were Black British, a citizen, a local, an offspring of the Windrush generation, you were constantly reminded that the motherland was not the homeland and that you were not welcome, even if you were born in it. I mean, it's like, go back to where you come from and it's kind of like, what, Birmingham, you know, what? That's where I'm from. It's kind of, where do I go back to?
There ain't no black in the Union Jack, which is what the NF used to chant.
Yeah. I think about the confluence of events that allowed me to begin my life native to the Midlands of England, to be Black British. And yeah, I do like saying that. I'm really proud of where I'm from. So I do like saying that. It's just the journey sometimes to get to the point where I do like saying that is sometimes problematic.
I should explain this. This is a thumbnail for a double-page spread, and this is you growing up in Birmingham and the kind of graffiti that you had to walk past when you were a kid.
Yeah, it's really weird seeing it. We've got some kind of pictures on the next of what I used to see when I was a kid, and usually this kind of stuff would appear overnight, or it would appear after a National Front march. And the National Front are for those of you who don't know, I'm not sure if you don't know, but they've morphed into something else. They keep morphing into different things, but they're like the neo-fascist, racist group that were big at the time, and that's what you used to have to put up with. But having said that, just looking at that, if that appeared now, it'd be cleaned off overnight. But these things would, except for her front door, obviously she'd clean that off. But you know, you'd see that be there for years. You know, nobody'd clean it off.
Which brings us to one of the main characters of this particular narrative, which is the gollywog. This is just a thumbnail from one page, but we bring Golly into it, and he makes numerous appearances, simply because he's kind of haunted you since you were a kid.
I don't know why I'm laughing, but yeah, he's a bit of a. It's really weird because I go through phases of I've kind of reclaimed him over the years, but when I was a kid, he was like the bane of my life, because it's kind of, we used to get called like either Golly or Wog. I mean, it was like or the you know, or Golly Wog, but I mean it was mainly Wog. I mean that was the thing that we used to get called.
And he used to appear on these jam jars. Golly's an interesting character because in the 20th century he was never copyrighted, and he was assumed as a mascot by this particular brand of jam, which was you know, the older UKers amongst you will probably recognise. But because he's out of copyright, I'm also free to use him as a character in the book, and he does make various appearances. Again, these are just thumbnails at this point, but he tells his own story. Hey, I was a symbol, and Ange says, "Well, yeah, he was everywhere in my childhood."
He was.
And
but I just a quick kind of story. When I was about 12 or 13, I went on a geography field trip, and went down to breakfast, sat down, and then got my place, and then went off to get my cereal. Came back, and somebody had like dug him out of the jar.
These little things that you could clip out.
Yes, but they used the knife or something to cut him off the jar. And when I came back to my place, he was sitting on my mat. And I mean, it was just horrible, you know, and everyone started laughing, except for when I saw, you know, everyone talks about allies. I had a lot of allies in my life and still do. So I'm grateful for that. But my one ally on that day was Patricia Weldon, who was my best friend at the time, white Irish. She went absolutely berserk, which was really nice, you know, that she kind of stood up for me with these people who did that, you know. But it was pretty traumatizing.
We tell that story in the book. The way this works is Ange kind of tells me a story and we record it, and then I transcribe it and then sort of rewrite it, take it back to her and do thumbnails. And
I mean, it's kind of, you know, you probably look at it and think, well, that's just a character. It's not. But if you, back then in the, you know, 60s, 70s and 80s, it was a big deal. It was like that character was pretty nasty.
No, this is how oppression works.
By teaching people to see difference as a negative
rather than as a positive.
And this is how we continue to dehumanize the other. So, I mean, just following on from what I said a minute ago, I can't say that my life has been full of racism and nothing else, because I've had lots of allies. But incidents like the Gollywog episode do accumulate somewhere in your soul. And over time, you feel like you're weathering a long, slow storm whose hail and endless cold chips away at you.
To change the subject slightly, because I've worked also as a graphic recorder for the past 10 years, this, just to give you some idea of, that's the theme of the book, and we examine that both in the UK and the US and make comparisons between the two. But because I've worked as a graphic recorder for about the past 12 years now, isn't it? There's also a lot more, there's a different kind of language. I'm really kind of trying to kind of develop different visual languages. So it's not just comics, or it's language that I've used in graphic recording in corporate environments and brought back into comics. So there's a lot of this kind of more diagrammatic page layout in this book. You'll see. Just to give you a kind of a comparison, this is a double page spread that appears, which is basically at this point examining your experience of systemic racism in this country, isn't it? Yeah. But you can see how it goes from kind of comics to a sort of diagram of sorts, and hopefully kind of that will hook the reader in a little bit more precisely than, and there's all sorts of tricks like that all through the book where I'm really trying to kind of I'm trying to get the reader's emotional involvement. A little bit more on that. This is me, same page, and me experimenting with color. This is just a little promo piece I put together. And probably the color is not going to look like this in this particular sequence, because I want to kind of make the coding of color is going to be important for each different time period for the book, because we go into the deep past, we go into Angela's past, we go into my past, our past, our shared past, and then also now, the present, as it were, and post George Floyd, which we do also examine in detail.
So sometimes I'd go down to the shelter and talk with the workers there and ask them what they thought of the organisation's leadership. So we've moved from, all of the stuff around me and growing up and everything into previous organisations I've worked within.
Yeah, they don't understand what it's like to do what we do, and they don't want to know.
All my internal alarm bells went off. And worse, my personal experience confirmed how difficult it was to communicate with the upper levels of management. Stories are for everyone. That's what you always say.
Yeah, let's show the racists we're all made of the same stardust. That's all, folks.
Thanks for the intro, Nicola. I'm Aleesha, and I work primarily as an illustrator, I guess day to day as a commercial illustrator. But I'd say comics and narrative work are kind of a branch of my practice. I also do a bit of printmaking and that sort of thing. So with this presentation, I kind of thought I'd put in a couple of pieces of my illustration work and then kind of introduce everyone into how I got into making comics. So this is just, I have a bit of a thing about animals and nature and stuff, and it crops up a lot in my comic work as well, I think, as you'll see later. But this is just a self-directed image. I really like big cats and tigers, but this is kind of what I do day to day. So I work over a lot of different industries, I guess, with illustration, which is really fun and really exciting. So doing everything from working on book covers to working regularly with a spice company that's based in India. So these are two pieces of work that I made in the past year. I think, yeah, the piece on the left is a little promo illustration for the House of Illustration. Don't know if you can spot that I've hidden myself in there, and also a family pet, which I quite like doing. And a lot of my work is like hiding people I know and things I like in illustrations. And the piece on the right was for an exhibition for the Association of Illustrators, which I think was also in 2019. I feel like a lot of this work is pre-pandemic, when like events and things were still happening. So this is kind of generally like what my professional practice looks like. Also, I mean, Nicola wanted me to mention this, but I'm also part of, I co-run Milk Chai, which is an artist-led cafe. I say co-run, I feel like it's become a bit more of a collective now, but subsequently following a residency in Kathmandu, we were able to apply for funding and run a pop-up cafe in Kathmandu and invite our friends who are also really lovely, talented artists and illustrators to come and exhibit their work and run some talks. We ran an edition of the cafe in London, and we're hoping to do some more in the future, but it kind of all depends on like what the future looks like for big gatherings and that sort of thing. But in the pandemic, we asked our friends that were already part of the project to nominate artists from South Asia that they were into or felt like needed a platform for some of their work, and we produced this newspaper completely online, which was amazing. And everyone produced a piece of artwork that we risograph printed. At the moment, we're not selling it, but we're hoping to do another print run this year. If you keep an eye on all the Milk Chai Instagrams and that sort of thing, we'll let people know. But it ended up being a piece of work that we were really proud of, and we were able to connect with people, even though we weren't able to share a physical space. So yeah, kind of community art as well is also a branch of my practice. So up until I'd say the past year, I wouldn't say I'd been commissioned to produce any comics work. It's usually just like still images or images in sequence for picture books and that kind of thing. But I actually did get a couple of commissions last year to produce text and image work, which was really exciting for me. This was a piece I produced for Hackney Comic and Zine Fair. As part of the fair, they actually had some work up in Dalston Square in East London, and they got quite a few artists. The numbers escaped me now, but it was several. I want to say like 10 or 15 comic artists and illustrators to produce a panel, and we got shown the panel that was created before us, and that was it. We didn't get to see the rest of the pieces. So the idea is like we all had to create the next panel of this comic, but having only seen one section of it. And it all had to be something to do with feeling isolated and well-being, because I think that's kind of what everyone was thinking and feeling about in the past year or two. And then they were displayed in Dalston with support from different mental health charities, which was also something very close to me, and it was really, really lovely to do. Also, this is a commission from the Mosaic Rooms, which is a really lovely space in London. If anyone's down or has the opportunity to visit, they asked me to go in and respond to an archive exhibition they had of lots of examples of publishing, and I was really drawn to this anthology of Afro-Asian poetry, as someone that has kind of a weird family heritage that's like British Indian, but also has family from East Africa and that sort of thing. I was really drawn to the text and image in that publication, and they asked me to produce a mini zine, which I think you can still download from their website and print at home. So these are a couple of the pages from that. It was really nice. I kind of like took excerpts from this poem, again, like nature and flowers and stuff cropping up. I'm also a really big fan of just really vivid colors and layering things up. I think that's kind of the printmaking training that I've had. It's kind of generally how I build up my images. So yeah, now that's kind of like work stuff. And now I'm kind of going to go through my introduction into comics making. And just like as a little, not necessarily a trigger warning, but just like there's a little talk of grief and mental health in the next section. Just want to flag that up for people that might find that upsetting. But the first kind of comic that I made properly after leaving university was this. It's called Grief. And I'd gone through a long period of not really making any work. I was kind of working a couple of jobs post illustration degree, and one of my closest friends passed away. And yeah, I think now retrospectively, I understand that I was going through a really, really strong grief, and I wasn't making anything, but I'd been writing odd little things here and there. And I kind of had this piece of text on my computer, I think that I'd just kind of knocked out one night before bed or something. And I think on one of my days off, I was looking around online, and there used to be this lovely free press anthology called Off Life, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. I tried finding the cover for it for this presentation, but their website doesn't even work anymore, which is really sad. But I remember seeing something on like Instagram or Twitter, like, hey, today's the last day to submit. We're looking for pieces of work that are heartfelt and kind of have meaning. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I looked, and it was like the deadline was like midnight that day. And I thought, all right, let me try and give it a go. And I don't know what it was, but I think that push was kind of what I needed to start making things again, because I made this, I submitted it probably like 10 minutes before the deadline, and didn't think about it. And then a couple of weeks later, they were like, hey, this was really poignant and we'd really like to publish it. And I was like, wow, okay. And that was kind of the first time that I kind of thought about writing a bit more, I would say. And it also then kind of helped me get back into making things, and then kind of trying to push on with my illustration career afterwards. So yeah, that was kind of my first foray into the into the comics world. And subsequently it was published in the book that Nicola curated, I want to say, called The Inking Woman. So it's a little excerpt of it is in that book as well, which is amazing because it's something really personal to me. Unfortunately, it gets a bit heavier from here, guys. So I kind of took that experience, and I think subsequently making comics and writing and putting text and image together are a really therapeutic thing for me. So I produced this zine a few years ago called Dark Masks, and the premise is watching someone you really care about go through a serious mental illness. And I kind of made these while I was experiencing that, and kind of made it with no intention of showing anyone. I think pretty much like the grief comic, just for myself, just to kind of like release those emotions or whatever it was. And I did show a couple of my close friends, and one of them being Sophia Niazi, who works for UMC and Rabbits Road Press. And she got a commission from It's Nice That, who were doing a feature for World Mental Health Day. They ended up printing it for me and featuring it on their website and stuff. And subsequently, I got invited to go and speak about it a lot. And I think even now, I still get a lot of messages about this comic, about people really being able to relate to it, which is amazing to think that going through an experience and then kind of visualizing it can somehow help someone feel better about this situation. So, by the way, if you want to see the rest of these or anything like that, it's all up on my website. I know I'm just like putting up a couple of pages here and there. So yeah, these are a few more from that. And this one was really interesting. Again, this is just like a little zine that I self-published. And it's so interesting to me looking back at these images that I made quite a few years ago now, and then having been post a few lockdowns, kind of looking at these images of people stuck in their houses and like finding that really interesting when I was making this presentation. But again, this is like about feeling overwhelmed and anxiety and kind of thinking of like interesting, surreal ways to represent it visually. So that. I think anyone kind of butting heads with siblings and that sort of thing might kind of be able to like understand what this one feels like a little bit. How am I doing for time, by the way? Am I good at the minute? I should have started timing myself. I'm so sorry. I haven't got that much.
You've got 5 minutes. You're okay.
Okay, that's great. That's great. We'll whiz through these. That's all good. Okay. Again, this is just a compilation of self-made, self-published comics. I really enjoy working in this like short format of just like 3 or 4 panels. These in particular are a collection of like a mishmash of like the notes app on my phone or stuff I write down like as I'm half asleep. And I kind of put images together afterwards, or sometimes I read things back the next morning and images come to mind. And I ended up putting them in a collection. They previously just existed as little photocopy zines that I used to make when I had a day job, and my boss would like pretend not to look and he would let me like photocopy these zines on the photocopier at work, which was really sweet. These are a couple more from that collection. Just click through. And same with these. I think these kind of 3-panel comics I really got into in the past couple of years. I kind of draw them out in my sketchbook, add color digitally, and put them on my Instagram. But I think I realized a while ago that I had enough to like collate into a little book as well. So I ended up producing this little series called Bird in a Ribcage. And I've got a few more from there. I kind of really enjoy working in these like reduced color palettes with these as well. And just finding that really fun, kind of picking a color and being like, does this fit the words and the images? I had to put this one in here. I think I saw Colossive Press signed on to this call, I think. Hi guys, if you're watching. But this is like one of my favorite pieces of work I produced in the past year, just because it's such an interesting format. I was invited to make a piece for their series. And I really want to explore this a bit more, just in terms of like kind of breaking my usual rules of working in just like a little square. And it was really nice, like layering images on top of each other, It's, yeah, I'd really recommend going and checking them out. They've got a lovely series of work and people that have contributed to them. And then the last few slides, I think, are just like silly little things I make for myself. This comic is about like lots of emails I get about people wanting to come and like photograph me working in my studio, when in reality I work in my teenage bedroom most of the time in like my pants. Like it's like, and I have to email back being like, no, absolutely not. You can't come and film me in my studio. And yeah, I've kind of also been exploring these pieces where it's just like a single image and text. So I'm going to flick through these a bit quickly because I'm wary of time. Again, lots of trees and bugs. It's just a thing. And this is my last slide. This is one I made just the other week, and it was inspired by seeing all the crocuses and the signs of spring coming up here in the UK, despite like the wild storm we've had the past couple of days. Yeah, and that's me. Thanks so much for listening, everyone.
Here we go. So yeah, this is my webcomic called Webcomic Name. And you can just see the presentation, right? You can't see everything else on my screen. That's all good. Cool. And has that changed now? Yeah. Cool. Great. So yeah, this basically it's always the same format, and this is it. So it's hope good things happen, and then they don't, and then the blob says, oh no. That's basically it. And I've done it since 2016. And it's always been the same format. So it's the same thing over and over again. I've got some more examples just to show that. So this was one of the first ever comics I drew for it. And as you can see, it's very badly drawn. And that was kind of the point, as I will get into later, was, yeah. And so again, summarizing the themes of failure and yeah, another one. This one's very popular with my teen girl fan base at comic conventions. This one is another one, just some more comics. And another one. This is the purest, oh no, the most relatable. Cool. And so this is the summary of my webcomic. Always the same. So yeah, so basically I'm going to go in this. So I thought the best thing to do for this time, because I used to do quite a lot of talks. I haven't done one for basically since 2020. And I've cut this down from a much longer talk, but I think I'm going to focus more on, you know, things that people who make comics can identify with, but also a lot of people seem to be quite confused with how digital comics work, and people are very print comic focused. So this is kind of me focusing on that a lot. Yeah, so this is very much a web comic. My big inspiration sort of starting out, this is a comic by Kate Beaton, who was making comics, I think is in the era of web comics kind of before me, before like my kind of like group, which is before social media feeds. So I used to go on Kate Beaton's website to view these comics, and she does amazing comics. She stopped doing them as much now, but that were about historical and literary characters, and her stuff is like so great, and her simple but like really fun drawings, and she often did 3 panels with a title. It was like a really big influence on me. And then this is another comic I was reading a lot of when I started out, which is Dinosaur Comics by Ryan North, who has been making, so every single comic he draws has this same format, so the same pictures, and he just changes the text, and he's been doing it every day, every weekday since 2003. So this is before, he's been doing it since before Facebook was invented, and it's the same format every time, and he's still going now. This is the one from today. This is and he just does them all the time, and he's amazing. They're both Kate Beaton and Ryan North are like geniuses in different ways, but they were, you know, they make things that you couldn't really make, that it would only exist on the internet. So because no one would commission a comic like this, and so yeah, this is the first ever comic I made. When I was reading all of those comics, this was the first thing I ever uploaded to the internet. I think it was 2011, and you can already see there's like the simpleness, my inability to draw well, but playing with form is a big thing that I do a lot, and yeah, sort of pushing the boundaries of like you know, for example, how speech works, and the fact that speech is a visual thing in comics was something I was doing there. And it's funny looking back at this stuff. I haven't looked at it for a while. So yeah, I started doing comics. I never went to art school. I went to Bristol University to study English literature. And I think that was a really good thing. I'm all self-taught in terms of drawing. As you can tell, this is not a studied way of drawing, but it meant that I was the only person in my university drawing cartoons of any sort. So I did some comics for the student newspaper. Here's an example of one. This was one of the early ones, and I then later uploaded this to the internet. But it was very much like this is a student's comic, but it's interesting to look at because it's about a shapeless, the main character being a shapeless blob. I think it was me just kind of dealing with the fact that, you know, having a bit of an identity crisis when you go to university, sort of thing, and about drinking, which is, you know, it's a first year kind of stuff. And this was another one. You can already see that I'm like enjoying drawing a bit more. And all of these were drawn by hand, and then scanned in, and then I colored it. I used the library scanner at my university library and colored it using GIMP, I think, which is the free software. So my style basically is made for having no knowledge of software and making it the most effective with the least technical ability, basically. So yeah, it's a bit. These are a bit more wordy as well, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much for you to read them. And because I was the only person drawing comics in a university, towards the end of third year, I was doing things like this. I had one half-page editorial comic like you saw then, and then I had a double-page spread in the middle of the newspaper, which was one of these illustrations, and another page as well. I basically was doing a huge amount of theatrical work every 2 weeks. This is an example of a fold-in that was used in Mad Magazine. I just copied it from Mad Magazine because I thought it was, again, I really wanted to play with form, and I had to dig this out for this talk. So this is the physical. This is not the magazine. This was just the thing I actually drew, and this is with I think what I had at the time, which is Crayola pencils and a pen. Again, I would have scanned this in, but I didn't have a scanner this big, so I would have scanned it in half and then sewn it together using GIMP. So yeah, this is a fold in. So it's got everyone partying at the nightclub, and then if you fold it in, it's got someone stressing out about their work. So it's just university kind of experience. So this is, I kind of did loads of stuff like this, trying to push, like form and playing around with stuff like that. But that's me just copying off the guy who does them in magazine, which is really good. So yeah, this was one of the comics as well I did for the university newspaper. Again, you can see I'm getting a bit more ambitious, and the plot of this is basically, it was around exam time, and someone has their, it's hard to explain, but basically someone has their brain open, and then they metaphorically, but then it literally, their brain sort of gets shut on someone's hand, and then they go to fill in the graph in their exam, and it comes out as a hand. It's the thing I liked at the time was, what's the biggest stretch of an idea that I can make work, which I still would like to go back to. I tend to make it more simple these days, but yeah, that's how I used to draw comics a lot. This was all before I even started doing webcomics. Again, this would be drawn by hand using just a basic pen and then colored in on GIMP. And this one, again, I would have scanned it in half. This would have been A3, and then I scanned it in and just put them together. So yeah, so this is basically my biggest influences. I would say my two favorite films are The Fly with Jeff Goldblum and Clueless, and I think together is like the aesthetic I was going for at the time, which is girly, but also body horror stuff. So yeah, and then now I'm kind of going into what I wanted to do when I finished university, which was start a webcomic, which was called, at the time, was called Doris McComics. Originally Doris McComics was my pen name because I didn't want people to know who I was. And you can see there's like this like kind of literariness and girliness mixed together, which I was kind of going for. And so here's some examples of some Doris McComics comics. These are all from like 2013 or so. And these were, but again, you can see it's already getting smaller and simpler to fit on the internet, basically. This is an example of like a body horror punchline. And a lot of these, you'll notice, have what is essentially an oh no punchline, where people there's a bad ending to the comic and the characters aren't having a very good time. That's always what I've wanted to do. And I began playing with the form and stuff. This one's a bit complicated, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but basically the character pulls the punchline into the third panel, and then it becomes a recursive comic, and so it never ends. And this is me again playing with the idea of a punchline and a short form thing. I think this is one of my best ones, the ones I'm most pleased with. Yeah, I was, the one thing you can see in this is I wasn't really sure what my characters were, so I just used like a generic cat, a generic, these generic characters. Here's another example of like me trying to use a bit different characters and finding an oh no kind of thing out of nothing. So like just the idea that they were saying it's okay, and then their fingers fused together for some reason was just, and this was one of the first 3-panel comic I ever did. Yeah, I just wanted to show that. So Doris McComics didn't really have a main character, and then I gave, I was like, I need a recurring character. So I had a recurring character called Recurring Character. And the idea was that they had recurring character written on them, but to accommodate the word recurring character, that she had to be like really flat and wide. And she basically had a horrible time in all of the comics, and she was my like first kind of recurring character. Again, you can see I'm just like so aware of like the process of writing a comic that I can't just make something without it being completely analyzed. Okay, so then I was making this comic from 2013 till 2015. I think in 2015, I got approached by Webtoon, who are a big Korean webcomic app, and like they're really big now. But I was one of the first I was in the first batch of English language artists to be on Webtoon, which people don't really know anymore because no one reads my stuff. And if you know Webtoon, you'll know how highly polished a lot of the art is. And just to show you how bad mine is, this was the first thing I ever did, called How to Love. This is the art I did, and it's so funny looking back because this was me using a library scanner and not really knowing what I was doing, and I had to sort of make quite a lot of comics. So the idea of this was that it was love advice for teenagers. I'm going to just skip through this a little bit. So you encounter someone and they are like a love object, and then suddenly feelings. These feelings of love transform you, and that's basically so the main character, again, I love like thinking of weird designs for characters, is this like half heart, like half love, half person, and so I'm making that. This is, so you can see how bad the drawings are here. Very simple, again, trying to do a lot with a little here, but it was a love. People would ask questions and I would answer them about love, and I'm turning that into a book at the moment, which is quite exciting, and which is going to come out next year, I think, which is weird looking back at all of this because my stuff now is a million times better. This is just some like previews of the book. I'm just me working out some covers for it. Change the character, you can see, so it's a bit more pleasant to look at. This is like one of the chapter headings. Can I just say single? So you can tell I'm like putting a bit more effort into the art, and also I know how to I use Clip Studio now, and I have an iPad to draw on rather than the horrible system I had up until recently. So it means it's a million times easier to draw things. But I still like keeping this sort of colorful, simple style. Here's an example of one of an unfinished chapter. This one's about loving multiple people. So it's about non-monogamy, about kind of in rom-coms, there's always pressure. They go, oh, it's a bad thing if two people love you, as if like that's bad. And then this idea that like loving one person comes at the expense of loving someone else. And then I kind of talk about how with friends we don't, this is an unfinished chapter, but with friends we don't treat it like that. We accept that we have many friends. Having one doesn't take away from the other one, and so why not with romantic love as well? So yeah, this is kind of I got this, this is a kind of work in progress, so I'll give a little glimpse into my new book, which is fun. What's coming next? Oh yeah, so the other series I did for Webtoon, and I wanted to talk about Webtoon because I don't really often talk about it, but I thought people would be interested in it. This was a series I did after How to Love called Hello World, and this is me at the time as well, I look quite similar. And basically this was a travel series, and the idea of it was that it was a really bad travel series because it would just be me traveling to places near my house in London that were really rubbish, rather than going anywhere. And it was a photo collage thing, and again I just used my phone camera, which this is 2015, I think, yeah, 2015. So, and I had a bad phone, so again, me making it a lot with a little, and this is me, I used a pirated copy of Photoshop because I couldn't afford anything else to use with this. And this is Johand, who's my little hand, who is my helping hand. It's called Johand the Helping Hand, who I took everywhere and would often be in the comics as well. So yeah, that was me trying to get out of the house basically, and change my my process in terms of that. So I started this whole series based on that. And yeah, that was this, but I was kind of getting frustrated when I was doing this with, Webtoon has its own audience that's different to the main social media audience, I suppose. And I'm very much on social media now, and so I in 2015, I was thinking about what would be the perfect webcomic. So I was like, I just want to make something that's, I used to overthink things a lot. And so I was like, I just want to make something that's popular for once, because everything I made was sort of had a cult following, I guess, but not in a thing that was like broadly popular and, you know, fun to make. So I wanted to have a style where you can know what the webcomic was straight away. This is all when feeds became, because feeds weren't in 2004, 13 or whatever, I can't remember. But they came in, and then suddenly like you just had a feed in front of you rather than going to people's profiles. So it had to be instantly recognizable. Understood in less than 7 seconds is the rule of just like knowing you get something from it straight away, rather than it being like it means it has to be simpler. You don't have I never have an ongoing storyline, particularly not often, because it should be, you know, understood easily. You get something from it if you keep reading. At the time, relatable comics were all the rage, so everything was relatable. Now everything is more political and topical. And the main thing with webcomics, as I always say, is it should be shareable, so people should read it and want to share it. And I think not just because it's really good, unless you want to make something really incredibly beautiful, which is hard, make something that people want to share because they relate to it often. And I was like, I want it to have a catchphrase, because that's a fun kind of trashy way of getting good readership. So this was the first ever comic I did with an Oh No punchline, which was a parody of relatable comics, and I brought it out on April Fool's Day to be like, imagine if I made these awful comics. And the piece of paper talks in it, because that's the kind of bad sort of thing I wanted. This is about introverts, because everyone was talking about introverts back in 2016 or whatever. This is 2015. Cats, everyone was on the internet talking about cats. So yeah, so these are the comics that I was doing initially. And this was just I did all of these in one day. I drew them all in one day, and I just had an absolute blast, and they were really popular, by far the most popular things I'd done. So I was like, well, these, you know, should be what I keep doing. If you look at the colors are quite different to my comics now, because I used to use a lot of purple, because purple's like dark and weird. So I used to use it as a background color a lot. But then, yeah, I spent about a year just like sort of thinking about those comics and what they could do. And the style now, as it is now, is very influenced by things like Peppa Pig, which is, I still say, one of the best shows on TV. I think it's great. And you can see like this kind of child style where like everything is kind of the most simple version of itself. But still really fun to look at, and the colors are really fun. What else we got here? This is my favorite character design of all time, which is Lowly Worm by Richard Scarry, which is literally just a hat and then a shoe, which is, I think, the perfect character design. I also love, again, another inspiration was like Roger Hargreaves, who draws very simply and badly. Like a lot of his drawings are like, you can see there's like what we call tangents and just awkward. Like he just did it with a felt tip pen. Like it's so bad, and I love it. This is his later sort of work, a bit later, which is a bit more polished, but still just like kind of trashy, which I love. And I love like watching people fail at making art. So this is someone on the internet who's tried to draw an elephant and got it wrong. So yeah. I've not got a lot of time, so I'm going to skip through. I've got loads of stuff. This was all about William Blake stuff. He did a poem about a tiger and then illustrated a really bad tiger. And so this is me, kind of what my attitude in terms of drawing Webcomic Name was, making the actual character designs and stuff like that at an Oh No. So you like, it was, yeah, this there's a few comics that I like that are my core philosophy of Webcomic Name, and this is one of them. Of like, every time I design something in Webcomic Name, it should either be the most pure version of something, like a piece of paper or a table or a pencil, or it should be the perfectly worst thing, so like the cat. just being like the perfectly the worst cat, and then similarly like the so like this. The Blob, I wanted to make the most unoriginal character, so it was also the most easy shape to draw. So it means I can draw the character like straight away, and it always looks a bit different, but because it's a blob, it's fine. I liked it being like ditto because it's the same thing repeated over and over again. And I've noticed that since I've been making these comics, like now a pink blob is like almost like a standard, or like a pink person, generic person. Wasn't a thing when I started out. It's just become more of a thing recently, but now loads of webcomics have similar like colors and stuff, which is totally fine with me, but that's because it's all about being unoriginal, so I guess works. Oh yeah, and I've got some character designs that I've done, which this is a slug, my favorite animal because it's the worst designed animal. Hedgehog. Horse, which is just a chair, because a horse is a chair really, isn't it? Butterfly. Duck, but it took me ages to realize, to work out how to draw birds in this style. Snake, and a lizard, which is a snake with a leg, and an ant, and a spider. So yeah, I think that's I'm going to skip through a few now because I'm getting close. This is me talking about the philosophy of making bad comics, which I will skip. This is me designing a dog. I didn't know how to draw a dog in the comic for ages because it wasn't bad enough. I wanted the dog to be awful, and then I was like, it's just the box with the word dog in it. That's how I draw dogs. And yeah, this is the dog, and he never says woof. I always make a point of being like, the dog never says woof. It only ever says hello, I am a dog, which is what woof means, I think. This was my most popular comic by far when I first brought it out, and I use it as an example of how, by making an abstract kind of representation of something quite basic, it can be used in different ways. So this was often used I brought this out in 2016, before Brexit and before Donald Trump was elected. So these did the rounds a lot during that time, and since. People don't really use it as much anymore because we live in a world that is just literally, we're used to it being the third panel now. So but at the time, people were, this was the feeling of a lot of people. And yeah, and this is me representing myself as in the world of the comic. This is the purest artist, which is just a hand and with the end that just ends with a face. So yeah, and I think I'm going to I talk about gender because I had how I talk about, because I'm queer, non-binary, and I used to hide myself away a lot, so I wasn't really present in my comics at all, which is still totally fine. But I used to it took me a while to realize that I wanted this blob to be like kind of everything. So it'd be like all sorts of gender stuff, so rather than being genderless, the blob is like genderful. So it just can people always assume the blob is a man because people just assume like default male, but yeah, so I would say it's genderful, not genderless, which is nice. And so that's been a little bit of a kind of learning about myself through my own comics, which is fun. And so yeah, you can tell this is me recently going, rather than being just relatable, it's the comics are topical, which has been really a really easy transition, but it's been interesting to see these early comics versus these comics now, which are a bit more like dealing with issues, and I feel much more able to do that now, of like contributing to like summarizing the discussions that we have, and like, for example, this is one of the ones I'm most pleased with because you can't argue with this comic. It doesn't mention trans stuff at all, or gender or anything. It's just literally about how weird it is that we hide our genitals with things that represent our genitals. So you can't argue with that. It's just weird, and I'm pleased with comics like that. And yeah, so I think I'm gonna probably end there. Yeah, and so this is yeah, that's my comic, and that's the end.